it's Alice, and today we are gonna do a type of recommendations video that's just a little bit different. Now, if you track your reading, or you have the habit of like looking up books on Goodreads or Storygraph or whatever before you decide to pick up a book, you will of course have noticed that thing that says the book's rating. And I think that's very interesting. Very often I won't really question it, but every once in a while I will read a book and I'll be like, that was great, I really like that. And I will go to rate it and like review it. And the rating is just like a little bit surprising to me, and I'm like, oh, maybe I'm in the minority with my opinion. That's totally fine, of course, like it's just down to personal taste. But I have also noticed that every once in a while I will like be on the fence about a book and I will look it up, and the rating kind of makes me not want to read it because it is a little bit low. And I disregard that if I've heard someone that I really respect, like online or whatever, and that likes the same books as me. If they say that the book is good, I won't care. But if I'm like really unsure, I will like decide to not pick it up for the time being, because I don't know, I get a little bit hung up on it. And that made me think about books that I think are worth reading that actually have quite low ratings on like Goodreads. And I thought it could be fun to just do a video about some of those books and like find the right readers for it, because I think half the struggle with certain types of books is just like, this book is perfect for a certain type of reader and not everyone, but if you are that certain type of reader, it's great. So I've picked out some books. There's definitely a mishmash of different types of books and different genres, and I'm just gonna go through them, talk about why I like them and what kind of reader I think it would be good for, I guess. I'm sure you've gotten it by now. I think we should probably just get into it. The first book I've got is Bunny by Mona Awad, which has an average rating of 3.54 on Goodreads, which I'm both surprised by and also I completely understand somehow. This is contemporary fiction, and it follows this student who is a part of this highly selective, prestigious writing program at her university, and she's kind of like an outsider. And in her class, there are these three girls who are like rich, and they're really weird. They seem to be like weirdly connected, and they all call each other Bunny. And the story sort of takes off when these girls decide to invite our main character to one of their events, and it gets really weird. The thing with this book is that it really is super weird, and it gets more and more bizarre the further in you get. I think the writing in this is fantastic. I think the atmosphere is great. It has a very particular vibe to it that I really like, and it's filled with unlikable characters, which is also a thing I like reading about. It is sort of hard to explain though how this book just gets stranger and stranger, almost to the point where you don't really know what's going on, and some of the things you might not totally understand because the main character doesn't totally understand. I think it's very challenging with these types of books to really tell the reader in the blurb how bonkers this book is and how weird it is. And I wouldn't necessarily call this book like experimental, because I don't feel like that's the right word to describe it, but it is very strange and unusual, and it's the kind of book where like stuff happens, but some of it is a little bit vague and not all of it makes complete sense. And I feel like the readers who would like this are people who, like, you're totally fine with reading a book and just finishing it and being like, what in the actual hell was that? Like, that's the kind of reader who would enjoy this book. I think the most accurate description on the back is that it says it's blending sharp satire with fairy tale horror. I think that's a pretty good way to describe it, but really you have to like weird books to like this. Secondly, we have got The Mitford Murders by Jessica Fellows, which has an average rating of 3.51. And this is historical fiction mystery, and we follow this woman who just really wants to escape her life of poverty, and she wants to get away from her very oppressive and dangerous uncle. And her way out of it is to take up a position with the Mitford family, and her job is basically helping the Mitford sisters with anything they need. Now, this is an interesting one because I completely understand the rating and I completely understand why so many people were disappointed in this book, but I actually really liked it, and I think if you had the same experience as me, you would also like it. But the sort of downfall of this book is that it leans on the Mitford family and the Mitford sisters. Obviously, it's named the Mitford murders, and the characters in the book are like sort of based on the Mitford characters, but not really. And I think that's sort of the issue with it. I think a lot of people have picked this up because they're interested in the Mitfords, and then you read the book and you find out that the fact that they're called the Mitfords is like almost entirely irrelevant. I really feel like the characters in this book could have just had completely different names and it would not have mattered at all. And I think if you're gonna sort of base something on real people, it should shine through in a way, and I get the sense from the reviews that it doesn't. I, however, when I picked up this book and I read it, I didn't know anything about the Mitford family. Like, I didn't know. So I just read this as a regular cozy mystery, and I ended up really enjoying it. Like, I think the historical time period is really good. I really like the mystery. I really like our main character, and the family that's in it was, to me, just a regular family, and it didn't matter that they were Mitford. So for this one, I feel like if you're coming from it, from the same place that I was, you would probably quite enjoy this because I think it's quite a good cozy mystery. But I think if you're going into it with like an expectation, which is a totally understandable expectation when the book is what it is, if you have the expectation that you're going to read about the Mitfords, this isn't really going to do it for you. But if you go in not really knowing anything and you just want a cozy historical mystery, I think this is pretty good. Next, we have got The Sport of Kings by C.E. Morgan. And this has an average rating of 3.57 on Goodreads. It's historical fiction, it's set in Kentucky, and it's an epic saga about these people who are brought together through horse racing. And it sort of explores race, slavery, humanity, and family legacy. To be fair, it has been quite a few years since I read this book, but I wanted to mention it because it's one of those books that I vividly remember. I read it, I really enjoyed it, I still even remember some of the plot points from it, which is amazing for me. And when I'd finished it, I went onto Goodreads to rate it, and I remember looking at the average rating and being like, oh, maybe I'm in the minority of liking this. And I read the reviews, and like, having read some reviews, I do kind of get why a lot of people wouldn't like this. This is a book filled with horrendous characters. And characters that you won't always understand, and some of them have like completely unredeemable qualities. So if you don't like reading about those kinds of characters, this isn't the one for you. I also think the writing is quite distinctive. It's very descriptive, and it almost borders on being overwritten sometimes. So if you don't like that, you're not gonna like it. It's also quite a long book. It's the kind of book that, because of the way it's written, it does feel quite long, and it is a little bit of a longer book. And if you don't like that either, you're not gonna like it. And that's a lot of elements to not like in a book. For me, I like those things under the right circumstances. And for me, like, this just really worked, and I enjoyed the fact that it was written the way it was written. I liked reading about the characters. I thought they were fascinating, and I quite liked that it was long, although it was maybe a little bit too long. I have also seen some reviews mention being really disturbed by some of the stuff that happens in this book because there's a lot of sketchy stuff in it, so it might also be the kind of book where it might be a good idea to like look up trigger warnings first, because there's some stuff in this book. Then we've got a book that I very rarely hear anyone talk about, but it really made an impression on me. It's a Concise Chinese-English Dictionary for Lovers by Xiaolu, and this has an average rating of 3.55 on Goodreads. It's contemporary fiction, and it sort of explores different words in the English language, and through that, a romance between a Chinese immigrant and an Englishman is revealed to us. I think one of the reasons that this made such an impression on me is that it's very different from anything else I've ever read, and it has a very particular feeling to it that I've never really found in any other books before I read this or since I read it. It's kind of unconventional, and I think the setup is very interesting, and It's a book that is as much about love as it is about communication and language and culture. This is a difficult one to sort of explain why I liked it so much. I wonder if part of it is because I sort of read it at the right time and I was in the right mindset for this kind of book. But I do think that one of the things that could throw you off is the writing, because the voice of the main character is very distinct, but it's also quite harsh. And I think it's a book of self-exploration as much as it is about love, and we get to know the main character, and she's not super likable. Sometimes she's quite inconsiderate, and some of the choices that she makes are a little bit difficult to understand, but I thought she was a very interesting character to read about. And I also think some of the discussions on language in here are just excellent. I think if you're not interested in the main character and her angst, and you're not interested in the language discussions, there really isn't much for you in this. Like, if that's not enough, you will find this very boring and unengaging, I think. We then have one of my favorite horror books. It's You Should Have Left by Daniel Kehlmann, which has an average rating of 3.49 on Goodreads, I think. This tells the story of a writer and his family who are spending a week up in a cabin in the mountains, and this writer is recounting his experiences up there in his notebook. And it's very clear through this notebook that something strange is going on. I think how scary you find this is completely dependent on your level of how much like scary stuff you can deal with. My level is very, very low. It takes nothing to freak me out. And this isn't like the kind of horror that, it's not like jump scare horror or slasher horror or like it's really bloody or anything. It's just like this haunted house that's really weird and creepy and eerie. And like in the beginning of the book, there is like weird stuff happening, but you don't realize that it's happened until you reach the end of the book and you understand what's going on, which I thought was really cool. I feel like if you're really into horror, this might feel a little bit flat to you, like if you've read a lot of it. But if you're a fragile, delicate leaf like me in a world of scary things, I think you might like this. It's definitely more like spooky and eerie than outright scary, but it did freak me out quite a lot. Next, we've got a book that I'm actually a little bit surprised has such a low rating, but maybe it's just not as universally enjoyable and interesting as I thought it was. It's The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, which has an average rating of 3.54 on Goodreads. This is historical fiction. It's set in Victorian England, and it's set in this village that is engulfed with these rumors of a roaming sea creature. And the story centers around two people who become friends, and throughout the book, the lines of their friendship sort of blurs a little bit. This is another one that I read quite a while ago, but I remember really, really enjoying this. I loved the atmosphere and I loved the time period, and I really, really enjoyed the writing. But it's also the kind of writing that I understand isn't for everyone, just like Maggie O'Farrell's writing is not for everyone. It's very like descriptive, and I don't know, I really love that. But I am realizing that not everyone loves that. One of the things that I wonder about this one though is that this book was really hyped quite a few years ago, and I wonder if the hype is what got to people and it like raised a lot of people's expectations for this book and they were disappointed because of that. I remember I had really high expectations when I read this book, but I wasn't disappointed because I really liked it. I also wonder if this seems like a more plot-driven novel than it actually is. Like the sea creature and stuff, at least as far as I can remember, it's sort of like a vague background thing in a way, and I would say that this is more of like a character-driven story, and I think if you don't like the writing and you're not interested in the characters, there really isn't much here for you. Then we have got one that honestly it doesn't have like a super low rating or anything. It's like a little bit on the lower side, but it's one of those books where I feel like if you're the right reader for it, it's just such a treat, and I want to help people, like the right people, find this book because I am definitely the right person for this book and I loved it. It's Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami, and this has an average rating of 3.73, which really isn't that bad. The story is set in Japan, and we follow this woman in her late 30s who is single and a little bit lost in life, and she runs across her old school teacher, and they sort of become friends, and they have this like hesitant intimacy that evolves from that friendship. If you're into plot, this is not the book for you. Like, not much really happens in this book. It's more of a slice of life type of story, and it's more reflective in a way, and it really is just a book where we meet these characters, we get to know them, and we follow them for a little while, and that's kind of it. But if you're into that, this is great. I loved it because it has this strange, melancholy, almost sad feeling to it that I just thought was wonderful. And it's a book that is as much about loneliness as it is about love and friendship. And I just loved it. It's very, it's very strange. And it's one of those books where, like, if you ask me what happens in it, I don't really know. I just remember the characters and the feeling of it. Also, if you like food being a part of books, this is fantastic, because most of what happens in this book is that these characters go out and eat, and we get to like read about the food, which I thought was amazing. But it's definitely a bit of a strange one, but if you like that kind of thing, this is just amazing. The next one I've got is one that I have an absolutely beautiful copy of. It's The Gracekeepers by Kirsty Logan, which has an average rating of 3.57. And this is sort of like a dystopian novel. It's set in a world where ocean covers most of the earth, and so most people live on the water. And we follow this girl who works with laying the dead to rest in the sea. And we also follow someone who works for a circus, and she travels around with her bear. And the story is about how when they sort of run across each other, their lives change. The main thing that I would say about this is that I think, like, if I read that blurb without having read the book, I would probably think that there was a lot of plot in this, and there kind of isn't. Like, there is stuff that happens, but again, it's more of like a character-focused book, and I think if the characters and the world that it's set in is not enough for you, you're probably not going to enjoy this. But if it is, this is really just magical. This is also one of those books where I love the writing. I absolutely love Kirsty Logan's writing, but I also understand that it's not for everyone. It's lyrical and it really takes its time describing things to you. This is definitely a slow burn of a book, and it really slowly reveals itself to you, which if you go into this book expecting like a super exciting story, that's not what this is. Second to last, we have another one that I'm again a little bit surprised that it doesn't have a higher average rating, but I wonder if this is also one of those where like the hype just got to it. It's The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, which has an average rating of 3.62 on Goodreads. And this is, again, historical fiction. It's set in Amsterdam, and we follow the new wife of a merchant who moves to Amsterdam, and she's not like, her life isn't great. Her home isn't super welcoming. Her husband is quite unavailable and a little bit mysterious. And the story sort of focuses on her and this miniature version of her house that she gets. And she like starts to furnish this, and like there's only one person in Amsterdam who makes miniature furniture for these kinds of things. And like the furniture he sends starts like reflecting her life in a weird way, and there's something weird going on. One of the main things that I really liked about this book was the historical time period and the setting. I really liked how all of that was described. I feel like it was quite atmospheric in that way. I really liked reading about the main character, and I think the miniature house thing, like the whole thing that's going on with that, adds like an unsettling vibe to this that I really like. Again though, this is definitely more of a slow book, and it does get a little bit obscure at times, and I will admit sometimes it is a little bit confusing, and I also think it's a book that can be a little bit difficult to get into. But I think the historical setting is great. I think it has a very interesting feeling to it, and it's an interesting story, and I loved reading this. Like, I couldn't stop reading it. It has like a compulsiveness to it that I really like. But I do think it takes a little bit of time to get into, and it is a little bit of a slower, weirder book. Lastly, we have the Virago Book of Witches, and this has an average rating of 3.53 on Goodreads, and it's basically just a short story collection about witches from all over the world. I think this one falls into that pit of getting a lot of 3.5 star ratings because it's a mixed bag. These kinds of books just are mixed bags, I feel, because it has different authors, it has different storytelling styles, and it has different themes, and it's just a mishmash. But it is the kind of book where I think you would be able to find like a witch story that you're really gonna like, and some of them you're not gonna like as much. I always end up rating these books 3 out of 5 because it's such a mishmash, but I still feel like they're worth reading. And this one is a great one because you get to read about witches from all over the world, which I think is really cool. Those were all the books in my stack though. This was a very interesting video to make, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on lowly rated books, and also if you've read any of these books and you either agree with me or disagree with me. I would love to hear about it and like why. I think people are just different kinds of readers and we like different things, and it's totally fine. And it's always interesting to hear your thoughts on these kinds of things. And also, if you have a book that you really like that you have seen has like a low average rating, I would love to hear about that as well, and what kind of reader you think it would be good for. Yeah, just very interesting. And I would also love to know if any of you now are gonna pick up one of these books, because I think that would be fun as well. That's kind of it, I think. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!